12 years ago, my husband and best friend ran off together, leaving me with cold divorce papers and a 3-year-old daughter they called a broken burden. They thought I would crumble under medical bills while they enjoyed Europe. But today, as they return in a rented sports car to demand parental rights, they do not realize the woman they abandoned now holds the life of their failing business in her hands. My name is Valerie Sterling. I stood in the shadow of the trellis, my shears slicing through the deadwood of a heritage rosebush. The late afternoon sun beat down on my faded denim overalls, the ones with the fraying hems and the permanent grass stain on the left knee. To the casual observer, I was just a woman of 34 trying to keep a mid-sized suburban property from falling into disrepair. They could not see the security cameras hidden in the birdhouses or know that the land deed inside my wall safe was entirely debt-free. The roar of an engine shattered the quiet suburban hum. A candy apple red sports car screeched to a halt at the curb. It was aggressive, loud, and judging by the barcode sticker still visible on the rear window, it was definitely a rental. Richard stepped out first. 12 years had not been kind to him. The jawline he used to be so proud of had softened into jowls, and his hairline was in full retreat. Jessica followed, stumbling slightly in heels that were too high for a Tuesday afternoon. She wore a designer bag that I recognized from a collection released 6 seasons ago. They looked like a faded, desperate photograph of the couple that had destroyed my life. I waited for the old ache, the crushing weight of abandonment that had nearly killed me when my daughter was 3 years old. It did not come. Instead, a cold amusement settled in my chest. It was almost funny to see them standing there, trying to project an image of success that was clearly fraying at the seams. Richard approached the gate, his smile practiced but tight. "Valerie, my God, look at you. You look exactly the same. Still working so hard." He reached out to touch the gate latch, and I saw it. The tremor in his hand. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light, but the sweep of the second hand was jagged, not smooth. It was a counterfeit, a cheap knockoff. They were not just here for a visit. They were drowning. I wiped my gloved hands on my apron, adopting the posture of the weary, beaten-down single mother they expected to find. "Richard. Jessica. It has been 12 years. What are you doing here?" "We have been thinking about you." "Val," Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with syrup. "About everything. We couldn't live with the guilt anymore. We wanted to see if you were okay. If Lily was okay." I opened the gate, the rusted hinges groaning on cue. "Come in. I was just finishing up." I led them not to the main wing, where the original Matisse hung above the fireplace, but to the front receiving room. I kept this room intentionally drab beige walls, scuffed floorboards, and furniture I had bought second-hand. It smelled of lemon polish and struggle. Jessica sat gingerly on the edge of the sofa, her eyes darting around the room, cataloging the lack of luxury with visible disdain. "So," she began, smoothing her skirt, "how is she? The poor child. Is she still suffering?" I sighed, letting my shoulders slump as I sat in the armchair opposite them. "It is hard, Jessica. The treatments are expensive. She requires round-the-clock monitoring. It takes everything I have just to keep her comfortable." I saw their shoulders relax. They exchanged a quick, satisfied glance. I was still the victim. I was still beneath them. Richard leaned forward, clasping his hands together to hide the shaking. "That is actually why we are here. Valerie, we heard something." Rumors that my grandfather, before he passed, might have set up a trust. A specific fund for Lily's medical needs. I knew about the trust. I also knew it did not exist. My lawyers had planted that rumor in the very circles Richard and Jessica were desperate to re-enter. "We want to help you manage it," Richard said, his eyes gleaming with a hunger he could not hide. "For Lily, you know you are not, well, you were never good with numbers. Val, we just want to make sure the money is safe from predators." I looked at the man who had left us to starve. I looked at the woman who had stolen my life. Now desperate for a crumb of the fortune they thought I had stumbled upon, I forced a small, grateful smile onto my lips. I would appreciate that, Richard. I have been so overwhelmed. I watched the greed bloom on their faces. They thought they were wolves circling a wounded sheep. They had no idea they had just walked into the slaughterhouse. As I watched Richard sip the lukewarm tea I had served in a chipped mug, the living room walls seemed to dissolve, pulling me back to the night that had cauterized my heart. It was 12 years ago. Lily was only 3 years old. We had just returned from the specialist, the weight of a rare genetic disorder diagnosis pressing down on my chest like a physical stone. The doctor had spoken of lifelong treatments, specialized equipment, and a cost that would bleed us dry. I had looked to Richard for strength. Instead, I saw a man looking at a stain on his silk tie. "She is defective." "Valerie," Richard had said, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. He stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch, refusing to even look at the toddler sleeping fitfully on the rug. "I am launching the new firm next month. I need to project strength, vitality. I cannot have a cripple dragging down my image." Jessica was there, of course. She was always there, hovering like a carrion bird waiting for the beast to die. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch possessive and sly. "He is right. Val," she had purred, her eyes feigning sympathy while her lips curved in a victorious smirk. "Richard is meant for big things. Europe, expansion. You cannot expect him to chain himself to a hospital bed forever. It is suffocating." That night, the facade of our marriage did not just crack, it shattered. Richard threw a packet of documents onto the coffee table. The papers slid across the mahogany surface and stopped at my trembling hands. "I am filing for divorce," Richard announced, his tone as casual as if he were ordering dinner. "I am leaving you the house. Consider it a final act of generosity." He called it generosity. I later learned the house was mortgaged to the hilt, the equity drained to fund his gambling debts and Jessica's wardrobe. He was not giving me a home. He was anchoring me to a sinking ship. I picked up the papers, my vision blurring. The terms were brutal. He was relinquishing all parental rights. In exchange for 0 child support and 0 alimony, he demanded a clause that stated he would never be contacted, never be held liable, and never have to look at the child again. He stripped Lily of her father and her humanity in a single paragraph. "Sign it," he had hissed, leaning down until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Sign it, and you keep the roof. Don't, and I will fight you until you are on the street. I just want to be free of this mess." When the door slammed shut behind them, silence rushed in to fill the void. I was 22 years old. I had no job, no savings, and a daughter whose body was fighting against itself. I sat on the floor and held Lily, terrified that if I let go, we would both disappear. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation and grit. I pawned my wedding ring at a shop downtown for a fraction of its value. That money paid for the first round of medication. I took 3 jobs. By day, I scrubbed dishes at a diner until my hands were raw and blistered. By night, I worked a graveyard shift at a call center, answering complaints from angry strangers while Lily slept in a basket beneath my desk. On weekends, I tutored rich children who had the health my daughter was denied. But despair has a way of clarifying the mind. I spent every spare second in the public library, devouring medical journals and engineering textbooks. I needed to understand what was happening inside my daughter's body. I realized that the mobility devices available on the market were archaic, heavy, and obscenely expensive. They were designed to isolate patients, not liberate them. One night, staring at a diagram of a hydraulic joint, the weeping stopped. A cold, hard resolve took its place. I saw a flaw in the design standard. I saw a better way. I cleared out the garage, moving Richard's old junk to the curb. I bought scrap metal and second-hand electronics. I became a mechanic of human necessity. I did not crumble under the weight of their abandonment. I used the heat of my rage to weld, to solder, and to create. Richard and Jessica thought they had left me to rot in the ashes of our old life. They did not know that fire does not destroy everything. Sometimes it purifies. It hardens. The woman sitting across from them now, feigning ignorance and weakness, was not the girl they left crying on the floor. I was the steel that had come out of the forge. As I sat across from them, nodding politely at their fabricated stories of European galas and successful mergers, a secret hummed beneath my skin like a live wire. They looked at me and saw Valerie, the struggling gardener. They had no idea that the woman pouring their tea was the anonymous founder and majority shareholder of VGen Solutions, a biotech conglomerate currently valued at several $100 million. It had started in the garage with that first crude mobility device I built for Lily. I needed something that would grow with her, something that responded to her limited nerve impulses. It worked better than I dared to hope. 8 years ago, I sold the patent for the prototype to a Swiss medical giant for $2 million. To Richard and Jessica, that amount would have been a lottery ticket to be wasted on sports cars and villas. To me, it was seed money. I reinvested every single cent back into research and development. They spoke of Lily as if she were a vegetable withering away in a dark room. If they only knew. Upstairs, behind the soundproof door of her study, my 15-year-old daughter was likely analyzing the third-quarter revenue projections for our Asian market. Lily was not the broken doll they imagined. While she utilized a sleek, motorized exoskeleton of my own design to get around, her mind was a weapon of mass precision. She was a mathematical prodigy, currently completing her sophomore year of college online and serving as the youngest intern in VGen's history. My portfolio went far beyond the company. Over the years, I had quietly acquired a diverse array of assets, including commercial real estate downtown, a robust collection of blue-chip stocks, and the exclusive intellectual property rights to the gene therapy that kept Lily's condition stable. But my most satisfying acquisition was far more personal. 5 years ago, when the company Richard abandoned here finally declared bankruptcy, I bought his bad debt. I owned the paper trail of his failures. I owned the liens on his reputation. He was sitting in my living room, sipping my tea, completely unaware that he was indebted to me in ways that could bury him. I kept our wealth hidden for a reason. I drove a 10-year-old Honda and wore clothes from Target because I wanted Lily to understand the value of labor, not the entitlement of inheritance. We had built a fortress, not of stone, but of security and trust. Lily knew everything. I had never lied to her about her father. I showed her the court documents when she was 12. He is just a variable. Mom, she had said, looking at his photo with terrifying objectivity. An error in the code. We deleted him. So why were they back now? It was not guilt. It was desperation. My private investigator had sent me a dossier this morning that read like a tragic comedy. Their European business was a shell company designed for tax evasion. The authorities had raided their offices in Monaco last week. Their assets were frozen, and they were facing indictments for fraud. They were not just broke. They were drowning in debt to creditors who did not use lawyers to collect payments. They needed the mythical trust fund to pay off the loan sharks before their kneecaps were broken. I looked at Richard, who was now sweating slightly despite the cool air conditioning. I looked at Jessica, clutching her fake Hermes bag as if it contained her last lifeline. They wanted to play a game. Fine. I would use their own greed as the board. It is so generous of you to offer to help, I said, my voice trembling with a perfectly manufactured fragility. I have been so lost. If you could really help me manage Lily's funds, I would be forever grateful. I saw the relief wash over them, followed immediately by a predatory glint. They thought they had found a lamb. They were about to find out that they had walked into the den of a lioness. Richard and Jessica arrived promptly at 10 o'clock the next morning. They carried a bright pink gift bag that looked like it had been purchased at a gas station on the way over. With a flourish that was meant to be touching, Richard pulled out a plastic doll with oversized anime eyes and a frilly polyester dress. It was a toy designed for a 5-year-old. My daughter is 15. It was an insult wrapped in cellophane, absolute proof that their claimed longing for her was nothing but a script they had failed to memorize. The double doors at the end of the hallway slid open with a soft, hydraulic hiss. Lily glided into the room. She was not walking, but she was certainly not the helpless invalid they had concocted in their minds. She sat in the V-Gen Mark IV prototype, a carbon fiber exoskeleton chair that I had custom built for her. It moved with the fluidity of thought, controlled by subtle nerve impulses, humming with the quiet power of cutting-edge technology. Her face was impassive, her dark eyes sharp and analyzing, stripped of any childish wonder. Lily Richard choked out, stepping forward with outstretched arms, trying to summon tears. "My God, look at you. You have grown so much. Daddy is here. I am finally here." I watched his eyes closely. They did not linger on her face or the teenager she had become. They darted immediately to the titanium alloy of the chair frames, then to the expensive modern art I had forgotten to cover in the hallway, calculating the cost of everything in sight. He was not looking at a daughter. He was looking at an asset. Jessica tried to lunge forward for a hug, her perfume overpowering the room. "Oh, you poor sweet thing, Auntie Jessica is here now. We are going to make everything better. Look, we brought you a dolly." Lily deftly manipulated the joystick, spinning the chair out of Jessica's reach with surgical precision. She stared at the plastic doll in Richard's hand with cold amusement. "Please do not touch me," Lily said, her voice cool and steady, echoing the steeliness I had worked so hard to instill in her. "And judging by that gift, your concept of time seems to have frozen a decade ago. Did you get lost on the way to the toy store? Or did you just forget that humans age? I am 15. Richard. "I code in Python. I do not play with plastic babies." Richard flinched, his smile faltering. He realized quickly that emotional manipulation would not work on this child, so he pivoted to his true love money. He set the doll down on the table with a thud. "We can catch up properly later," Richard said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Valerie, we need to talk business. Serious business. I spoke to my contacts about the Sterling Trust. If we do not act fast, the government is going to take 40% of it in inheritance taxes. 40%. That is money that should go to Lily's care." I widened my eyes, clutching my chest in feigned panic. 40%. Oh no. "Richard, that is terrible. I barely have enough to pay for Lily's physical therapy as it is. I do not know anything about taxes or offshore accounts." Jessica smirked, leaning in close to Richard's ear, assuming the hum of the air conditioner would mask her voice. She is still a clueless idiot. "This will be easier than I thought. Just get her to sign." Richard pulled a thick, bound folder from his leather briefcase. "I have a solution. Val, this is a guardianship transfer. It gives me full control over the financial management of the trust to shield it from taxes. In exchange, I will sign a binding agreement to sponsor every cent of Lily's medical bills. I will take the burden off your shoulders. You will not have to worry about money ever again." He was offering to pay for my daughter with her own money while stealing the principal. It was despicable. It was perfect. I took the folder with trembling hands, acting as though the weight of the paper was too much for me. This is a lot to process. Richard, I need time. I cannot just sign away her future without reading it. Give me 3 days. 3 days. Richard agreed, though his jaw tightened with impatience. But no longer. The tax deadline is approaching fast. As they turned to leave, Jessica swung her oversized designer tote bag onto the console table near the door to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Does this lighting make me look pale?" she muttered to herself, preening. I saw my chance. "Here, let me get that lint off your shoulder." "Jessica," I said, reaching out with a helpful smile. As I brushed the imaginary dust from her jacket, my other hand slipped a microtransmitter, no bigger than a shirt button, into the open side pocket of her bag. "Thank you, Valerie," she sneered, grabbing her bag and strutting out the door without looking back. I watched the heavy door close behind them. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I looked at Lily, who was already typing on her tablet. "Did you get it?" Lily asked without looking up. "Audio is clear," I replied, tapping my earpiece. "Now, let us hear what they really think." We moved from the shabby living room to the library, where I pulled a specific book on the shelf, a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. The bookcase swung open silently, revealing the nerve center of my home. It was a soundproof room lined with server racks and monitors, the place where I often ran VGen solutions remotely. Lily maneuvered her chair to the main console, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard to isolate the frequency of the transmitter I had slipped into Jessica's bag. The audio feed crackled to life. They were in the car. The sound of traffic was a dull hum in the background, but their voices were crystal clear. "You better be right about this trust fund. Richard." Jessica's voice hissed through the speakers. "We have until next Friday. If we do not have $500,000 by then, Markov is going to start removing your fingers one by one. I am not going down with you." I watched the audio waveforms spike on the screen. $500,000. That was the price of their desperation. They were not just in debt, they were indebted to loan sharks. "Relax, Jess," Richard's voice replied, sounding strained and thin. "She is an idiot. Did you see her? She bought the whole grieving father act. Once she signs over the guardianship, we liquidate the assets, we take the cash and fly to the Caymans." And the cripple Jessica asked, "What do we do with the girl?" I felt my blood turn to ice. Beside me, Lily stopped typing. She sat perfectly still, staring at the visualizer. "We dump her," Richard said. The casual cruelty in his tone was nauseating. "There is a state facility in Eastern Europe. Very cheap, very distinct lack of regulations. If she becomes too annoying, well, accidents happen in places like that. I am not spending a dime of my inheritance on a broken machine." The recording continued, but I reached out and muted it. I had heard enough. I looked at my daughter, expecting to see tears or fear. I should have known better. Lily was my daughter. She was forged in the same fire. She slowly rotated her chair to face me. Her expression was not one of sorrow. It was a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach her eyes. "They do not see me as a person," Lily said, her voice devoid of tremors. "They see me as a line item to be deleted. Do it. Mom, please, finish them." I nodded, a silent pact sealed between us. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a number I had on speed dial. "Harris," I said when the line connected. "It is Valerie. Initiate protocol red. I need the main boardroom at VGen headquarters prepped for tomorrow morning, and pull everything we have on Richard Thorne. Every tax evasion, every shell company, every fraudulent loan application from the last decade. I want a paper trail long enough to strangle him." "Consider it done, Ms. Sterling," Harris replied, his voice crisp and professional. "Shall I alert the authorities?" "Not yet," I answered. "I want to see the look on his face first." I hung up and opened my laptop. It was time to bait the trap. I drafted an email to Richard, keeping my tone breathless and naive. I wrote that I had found a potential investor, a wealthy philanthropist interested in medical patents who was willing to pay a premium to take over Lily's guardianship and sponsor her care immediately. I hinted that the offer was in the range of 7 figures. I hit send. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Richard. "Valerie," he shouted, his greed vibrating through the phone line. "I just got your email. You cannot sign anything with this investor without me. I am the father I need to vet this person. I need to negotiate the terms to make sure you are not getting ripped off." "Oh, Richard, I was hoping you would say that," I said. injecting a wobble of uncertainty into my voice. I am so bad at these negotiations. Can you come with me? The meeting is tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the investors' headquarters. I will be there. He practically drooled. Do not say a word until I get there. Let me handle the money. I ended the call and looked at Lily. The trap was set. They were coming to the slaughter thinking they were the butchers. They had no idea they were the cattle. The VGen Solutions headquarters pierced the skyline like a shard of blue crystal. 40 stories of intimidating glass and steel that reflected the morning sun. From the high-definition monitor in my private office, I watched Richard and Jessica step out of their rental car. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, craning their necks upward, their mouths slightly open. They looked small. They looked insignificant against the backdrop of the empire I had built from the ashes they left behind. They walked into the lobby, their footsteps echoing on the Italian marble floors. I could see the calculation in their eyes. To them, this building represented a jackpot, a place where they could charm some foolish executive out of his money. They still believed I was just a desperate mother who had scraped together a favor from a friend of a friend, or perhaps a low-level secretary who had booked a meeting room she had no business using. My head receptionist, Sarah, greeted them with the chilly precision of a Swiss watch. She did not smile. Mr. Thorne, Ms. Vance, Sarah said, her voice amplified by the lobby's acoustics. You are expected. Please take the private elevator to the executive penthouse. She gestured toward the gold-plated doors at the far end of the hall, the ones reserved for board members and visiting dignitaries. Richard straightened his tie, puffing out his chest. He leaned in to whisper to Jessica, not knowing that the security feed picked up audio as well. This is it. Jess, he murmured, his eyes scanning the opulent artwork on the walls. Valerie must have hooked a big fish. Once we sign these papers for the trust, I am going to corner the CEO. I will pitch him the crypto mining concept. A place like this. They have capital to burn. They stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, the veneer of sophistication dropped. I am getting a Porsche, Jessica stated flatly, checking her makeup in the mirrored walls. No, a Bentley. I deserve it after dealing with that brat yesterday. Did you see the way she looked at me like she was dissecting a frog? Buy whatever you want. Richard laughed, watching the floor numbers climb rapidly. With the management fees we will extract from that trust, we will be set for life. We just need to make sure Valerie stays in the dark about the actual numbers. She is too simple to understand complex finance anyway. The elevator chimed softly at the 40th floor. The doors opened directly into the main boardroom, a space dominated by a 30-foot mahogany table and panoramic windows overlooking the entire city. 6 men in bespoke black suits sat along the sides of the table. They were my legal sharks, the most aggressive litigators in the state, led by my general counsel, Mr. Harris. They did not stand up. They did not smile. They simply watched Richard and Jessica enter with the predatory stillness of crocodiles sliding into water. Richard, oblivious to the temperature in the room, strode forward with his hand extended. He bypassed the empty seats at the side and walked straight to the head of the table. My chair. He sat down, claiming dominion over a room he did not understand. Gentlemen, Richard announced, flashing his salesman grin. I assume you are the investors Valerie told me about. I am Richard Thorne, Lily's father. I must say, you are making a smart move. My daughter has potential, but she needs the right guidance. My guidance. Mr. Harris adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at Richard with mild curiosity, as if observing a new strain of bacteria. He did not shake Richard's hand. Instead, he slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished wood. Mr. Thorne, Harris said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. Before we proceed with any discussion regarding guardianship, we had to run a standard background check. We call this due diligence. Of course, Richard said, opening the folder with a flourish. You will find everything in, or his voice died in his throat. The first page was not a contract. It was a summary of his outstanding debts to 3 different underground gambling rings. The second page was a copy of the warrant for his arrest issued in Nevada for wire fraud. The third was a detailed ledger of the shell company he and Jessica had used to launder money in Europe. "What? What is this?" Richard stammered, his face draining of color. "Where did you get this?" "We are very thorough," Harris replied simply. At that exact moment, the double mahogany doors at the far end of the room swung open. The heavy wood slammed against the stoppers with a sound like a gunshot. I stepped through the threshold. Gone were the grass-stained overalls and the messy bun. I wore a tailored white suit that cost more than Richard's car. My hair was sleek and sharp, my makeup flawless. I did not walk like a gardener. I walked like a titan. I stopped at the end of the table, staring down at the man who had discarded me, letting the silence stretch until it was thin enough to snap. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the hum of the climate control system. Richard and Jessica stared at me with their mouths slightly agape, their eyes darting between my face and the expensive cut of my suit. The disconnect was too great for their minds to bridge. They were looking for the woman in the stained overalls, the broken creature they had discarded. They could not process the titan standing before them. I walked to the head of the table where Richard was still sitting. I did not ask him to move. I simply stood there, projecting a silence so heavy that he scrambled out of the chair as if it had suddenly caught fire. I sat down. Lily rolled her chair up beside me, placing a tablet on the table with the casual authority of a boardroom veteran. She looked not like a child, but like a successor. Valerie Richards stuttered, blinking rapidly. "What? What are you doing? Are you the executive assistant? Did you sleep with the boss to get us this meeting?" I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and looked him dead in the eye. "I am the boss, Richard. I am the chairwoman and CEO of VGen Solutions. And Lily, the daughter you called a broken burden, is the majority shareholder. She owns 40% of this company." The color drained from Jessica's face, leaving her makeup looking like a grotesque mask. Richard gripped the back of the chair he had just vacated, his knuckles white. That is impossible," Richard whispered. "The trust fund. My grandfather." "There is no trust fund," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Your grandfather died penniless. We fabricated that rumor to bring you here. The wealth you see around you, this building, these lawyers, the millions of dollars in assets. I built it. I built it all from the very thing you ran away from." Jessica slammed her hand on the table, her voice screeching into the upper registers. "Liar. You are lying. You are just an uneducated housewife. You washed dishes for a living. You could not build a lemonade stand, let alone a company like this." I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded to Mr. Harris. He pressed a button on the console, and the massive screen behind me roared to life. A scanned document appeared, blown up to fill the entire wall. It was yellowed with age, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. "Do you recognize this?" "Richard?" I asked softly. Richard squinted at the screen. His eyes widened as recognition struck him like a physical blow. It was the relinquishment of parental rights he had forced me to sign 12 years ago. Clause 14, subsection B. I recited from memory, using a laser pointer to highlight the paragraph. In his desperation to avoid paying a single cent of child support or medical expenses, Richard Thorne hereby relinquishes all claims to any future assets, income, or intellectual property derived from the care, treatment, or management of the minor child, Lily Sterling. I turned to look at him. He was shaking now, a violent tremor that started in his hands and took over his whole body. "You see, Richard, when I started inventing the mobility aids to help Lily walk, I realized I needed capital, but I also needed to make sure you could never come back and claim a penny of it. You signed away your rights to the technology that became the foundation of VGen Solutions. You gave me the patent rights to the most advanced biomechanical company in the world because you were too cheap to pay for your daughter's cough medicine. Richard collapsed into the nearest chair, the air leaving his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He looked at the document, then at the sprawling skyline outside the window, and finally at me. He realized in that agonizing second that he had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand 12 years ago, and he had thrown it in the trash to save himself a few dollars. He had not just walked away from a family. He had walked away from an empire. And now, the woman he had left to rot was the one holding the gavel. The transformation was instant and repulsive. The man who had strutted into my boardroom like a king now slid out of his chair and onto his knees, his expensive suit pants pooling on the carpet. Richard crawled toward me, his hands clasped together in a parody of prayer, tears streaming down his face. "Valerie, please." "You have to understand," Richard blubbered, reaching out to grab the hem of my skirt before a security guard stepped forward to block him. It was her. It was all Jessica. She poisoned my mind. She told me the baby would ruin us. I always loved you. Val, I always loved Lily. I was just weak. Please, give me another chance. We can be a family again. Beside him." Jessica let out a shriek of pure rage. She lunged at him, her fingernails raking across his cheek, leaving angry red welts. "You spineless worm," Jessica screamed, shaking him violently. "You promised me millions. You told me she was a dumb cow. We could milk dry. Do not try to pin this on me. You failed businessman. You are the one who gambled away our last $50,000. "Silence," Lily said. She did not shout, but the authority in her voice sliced through their hysteria like a blade. They both froze, looking at the girl in the wheelchair. "You do not get to rewrite history just because you lost the game," Lily said, her eyes dark and unyielding. "You did not come here because you missed me. You did not come here because you care. You came for the money, and you will not have either." I placed a heavy black binder on the table. The thud echoed in the silence. "This," I said, resting my hand on the cover, "is a comprehensive file detailing your tax evasion in Monaco, your wire fraud in 3 states, and the illegal shell companies you used to launder money for the cartel. My team has been compiling this for months." Richard went pale, his breath catching in his throat. "I have 2 options for you," I continued, my voice devoid of mercy. "Option 1, Mr. Harris calls the FBI agents waiting in the lobby right now. You go to federal prison for 20 years. Option 2, you sign this confession admitting to your financial crimes and a restraining order that bans you from coming within 500 miles of me or my daughter for the rest of your miserable lives." Richard scrambled to his feet, trying to regain a shred of dignity. You cannot do that. I am her father. The press will eat you alive. Think of the headlines. Billionaire CEO keeps father from dying daughter. I will ruin your reputation. I looked at Mr. Harris. He nodded and picked up a remote control, pointing it at the large television screen mounted on the wall. "I believe the press is already occupied." "Mr. Thorne," Harris said. The screen flickered to life, tuned to a 24-hour news network. A breaking news banner flashed in urgent red at the bottom of the screen. "Authorities are seeking Richard Thorne and Jessica Vance for questioning regarding a multi-million-dollar international fraud scheme," the news anchor announced, her voice grave. "Their mugshots from a previous DUI arrest photos I had anonymously leaked an hour ago were plastered next to her head. Interpol has issued a red notice. Anyone with information on their whereabouts is urged to contact law enforcement immediately." The color drained from Richard's face until he looked like a corpse. Jessica collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. They realized then that the trap had snapped shut long before they even walked into the building. There was no leverage. There was no escape. I pulled a heavy fountain pen from my pocket and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It clattered loudly, sounding like a judge's gavel striking the wood. "Sign," I commanded, pointing to the confession. "Sign it, or the handcuffs waiting outside that door go on your wrists right now." Richard reached for the pen. His hand was trembling so violently that the nib scratched against the mahogany table before he could find the paper. Mucus and tears ran down his face, a disgusting display of self-preservation that had nothing to do with remorse. He was not crying because he had lost his family. He was crying because he had lost his freedom. He scrawled his signature, the lines jagged and weak, surrendering his rights to save his own skin. Jessica was less compliant. She screamed obscenities, flailing her arms as the burly security guards stepped closer to the table. "Get off me. Do not touch me. This is entrapment. I will sue all of you," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Sign the paper. Jessica," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Or I call the agents up here to drag you out in front of the board members." She snatched the pen from Richard's shaking fingers and scribbled her name, slashing the paper with the force of her anger. She threw the pen at the wall, panting heavily. As soon as the ink was dry, I signaled to the head of security. "Get them out. Now. Do not let them touch anything. Do not let them speak to anyone." 2 guards hauled Richard to his feet. He twisted his neck, his eyes searching desperately for Lily. He wanted a moment, a look, anything that would validate his delusion that he was still a father who deserved pity. "Lily Princess, please tell them I am your daddy," Richard cried out, his voice desperate and pathetic. Lily did not even blink. She rotated her chair away from him, her back acting as a wall of steel. Her fingers tapped on her tablet screen. "The quarterly projections look stable. Mom," she said to me, her voice calm, erasing his existence with total indifference. I stood up and walked to the edge of the table, looking down at the man who had once held my heart in his hands and crushed it. 12 years ago, you told me I was not worthy of your future," I said, locking eyes with him one last time. "You were right, because your future is a federal prison cell, and mine is this empire." The guards dragged them out. We did not follow them to the elevator. We did not need to. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the plaza below. Lily rolled up beside me. 40 floors down, the scene played out like a silent movie. I saw Richard and Jessica emerge from the revolving doors. They were immediately swarmed by uniformed officers and agents in windbreakers. I had made sure the Economic Crimes Unit knew exactly when they would be leaving the building. The evidence of their fraudulent debts had been delivered to the precinct an hour prior. From this height, they looked like ants. I saw the glint of metal as handcuffs were slapped onto their wrists. Richard slumped against a squad car, his legs giving out. Jessica was still thrashing, shouting at officers who did not care, until they pushed her head down and shoved her into the back seat. A tow truck was already backing up to their candy apple red sports car. The rental agency had reported it stolen after the credit card on file was declined. Another little detail I had arranged by freezing their remaining accounts. "They look so small," Lily observed quietly. "They were always small." "Honey," I replied, resting my hand on her shoulder. "We just did not have the perspective to see it before. We stood there for a long time, watching the flashing red and blue lights fade into the traffic of the city. The boardroom was quiet. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace. The ghost that had haunted our lives for 12 years was finally gone, carried away in the back of a police cruiser. I turned away from the glass window, the flashing lights of the police cruisers fading into the distance. The silence in the boardroom was no longer heavy. It felt light, purified. I looked down at my daughter. Lily was looking up at me, and for the first time in weeks, her expression was not one of calculation or defensive cynicism. She was smiling. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened the sharp angles of her face. "You did good, Mom," she said softly. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 12 years. I knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in mine. Her fingers were warm and strong. I was terrified. Lily, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I have been terrified of this moment since the day they left. I was so scared that when you saw him, when you saw your father, you might feel something, that you might want him back, that I would not be enough. Lily squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Biology is just code. Mom, it is data. Family is the people who stay. Family is the people who fight for you when the world is burning down. You are the only father and mother I have ever needed. We stayed like that for a moment, the bond between us stronger than any steel beam in the building. Then, Mr. Harris cleared his throat gently. He placed one final document on the table. It was not a lawsuit or a restraining order. The paperwork for the foundation is ready. Ms. Sterling, he said. I stood up and took the pen. Together. Lily and I signed the charter for Lily's Hope. It was a new nonprofit initiative dedicated to funding research and providing mobility aids for abandoned children with rare genetic disorders. We were taking the money Richard had tried to steal and using it to save children he would have called burdens. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from the legal team downstairs. Bail denied. They have 0 liquid assets. They are being transferred to the county detention center to await trial. It will be a long summer for them. I looked at the message, then opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to the names I had kept for over a decade, just in case. Richard, Jessica. I pressed delete. I went to the photo gallery, to the hidden folder where I kept the old pictures of a wedding that felt like a bad dream. I selected all and hit the trash icon. Deleted. I whispered. It was a digital action, but it felt like cutting a physical cord. They were gone. They were not just out of the building, they were out of our universe. Let us get out of here, Lily said, spinning her chair toward the door. I am starving, and I do not want fancy boardroom catering. We took the elevator down to the private garage. Parked next to the sleek company limousines and the luxury sedans was my old, dented Honda. It was the car I had bought when I was scrubbing dishes, the car that had carried us to 1,000 doctor appointments. I kept it to remind myself of where we came from. I loaded Lily's chair into the back and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered before roaring to life, a sound I loved more than the purr of any sports car. We drove out of the city, leaving the glass tower behind. We went to a small pizza place on the corner of our old neighborhood, the one with the flickering neon sign and the best pepperoni slices in the state. We sat by the window, eating greasy pizza on paper plates as the late afternoon sun bathed the street in gold. I looked at Lily, who was laughing at a joke I made, her face radiant and carefree. For years, I thought revenge was about making them suffer, but as I watched my daughter laugh, I realized the truth. The best revenge was not their handcuffs or their bankruptcy. It was this. It was the fact that we were happy. It was the fact that we had built a life so full, so rich, and so complete that their absence did not leave a hole. It left room for us to grow. They had tried to break us. Instead, they had forged us. I took a sip of my soda and smiled at the sunset. They left me a sick child, but she healed me and helped me build a world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Richard and Jessica's karma. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear our journey. See you in the next story.